Another river landing conversation. I'm Jim Kalaki, and I'm here with Helen Shields, and we have the great pleasure, and it really is a great pleasure, of having our good friend Bob Law along with us. Bob and his wife Kay have been residents here for several years. I know a former member of the resident council and various other notable activities, that some of which we may hear about as we go through this conversation. So Bob, welcome. It's lovely to have you here.
Well, thank you, Jim and Helen, for having me on this morning. I've looked forward to it. And so I'm happy to be here.
Great. Well, and we'll do everything we can to make sure you're happy in half an hour,
Well,
too,
let's hope so.
when we finish the conversation.
Bob, we know people here call you Bob and friends call you Bob. Was that your given name, Robert? And if so, was it a family name, or how did it come about?
Well, my full name was Robert Donaldson Law. And because I was named after my father, he tagged a junior on there. Now, I've been called a lot of things in life, but never a junior. So I've avoided that. Through the years, Robert became Bobby, sometimes wee Bobby, when I was very young. But eventually it was Bob, and Bobby ended up only on the baseball team when they were yelling to get the ball. So anyway, but I like the name Bob and have stuck with it, and so Bob is fine.
Good.
Right. And where were you born and where did you grow up?
Okay. Well, I was born in Detroit, Michigan, and a single child family. And my parents had both come from Scotland. My dad first to make way for my mother, and she came a couple of years later, and they were married in the States in one of the Detroit suburbs. But anyway, grew up in my early years in Detroit, but come time for me to go to kindergarten, my parents moved from Detroit regular into a suburb. Grosse Pointe Park was the suburb, and just because of the schooling system. And it was a great community to grow up in. Made a lot of friends. It was a nice neighborhood. And it was a very upscale type of community, in that there were a lot of facilities for people of all ages. And so growing up was a very enjoyable experience. And I loved school, and graduated from high school with honors. Went on to the University of Michigan. And I majored in chemical engineering, and that went well for a couple of years. But the third year, I just became unsettled with that particular major. And so it ended up that I decided that I would leave school, probably to the enjoyment of a couple of the professors, but a few others were not happy about that at all. At any rate, I went and became employed at Chrysler Engineering. Now, I was never a real lover of automobiles. You know, some people have just a love of the car and that, but it was a useful tool. And I was employed as a lab technician, and that lasted for a year, and the plan was that they would rotate me through different divisions or departments of Chrysler, and so I would have a broad feeling for where I would like to be, end up, you know. And however, during that tour process, about a year later, an opportunity opened up for a sister division called Chrysler Aerospace. And it was involved in the space program, and it was building, Chrysler had decided that it could help the Air Force build rocket airframes. And part of that process was to integrate some of the guidance and control equipment and everything like that. So I found myself being launched into the space industry. Very pleasant process. I just had to drive across town to get to a new division. And it was a worthwhile experience, I'll tell you.
Interesting.
So I spent a few years there. And along that process, of course, being a young single, I would attend church meetings and particularly church meetings for young people. And some of those churches that I attended, it really wasn't just for young people. However, I did go to Grosse Pointe Presbyterian Church for one of the young people's meetings. And I met a very attractive, charming young lady with blue eyes. Her name was Catherine Kinney. And from that, things went on very well. I was quite taken with her. And we ended up making plans to be married. Now, those plans kind of stretched out a little bit in time because the Chrysler missile had achieved what it had wanted to achieve, and the whole industry was moving towards bigger rockets. And the Saturn program, which is the current launch vehicle for space travel and experimentation, and that was to be located down in New Orleans area. And I just didn't want to leave the Midwest. Mm-hmm. So I stayed on and found another position with a place near Ann Arbor. In fact, it was just on the outskirts of Ann Arbor, called Bendix Aerospace. And Bendix Aerospace was a testing laboratory for aerospace vehicles, and it was involved in the early warning systems. Now, most people involved with early warning systems were deployed up on the Arctic Circle. That didn't happen with me. The plan was that the United States would use rockets with communication equipment to communicate with our embassies internationally if hostilities broke out. And so I was involved in testing the vehicles that were integrated with sound system and everything like that, guidance and control equipment, and got involved with writing test procedures and finally running tests on these vehicles. And it was my voice that was alerting internationally for test purposes only.
Yeah. One hopes.
So, fortunately, right. So anyway, I used the name Sky King, and of course I made a lot of different communications out of that. But it was a learning experience, certainly.
Wow.
Now, by that time, Kay and I had become very friendly and made plans. And we made plans to get married. And as I recall, we were married shortly before Aerospace Systems was asked to play a lesser role, probably because of the progress of the Saturn space program down in Michoud and that. And so anyway, but I carried on for a few years, and we eventually had 2 sons, And they're, of course, situated elsewhere in the country now, one in the Chicago area, and the other one out in Salt Lake City. However, when it came time for Bendix Aerospace to start phasing down, I went with Hewlett-Packard. And that was a career choice that lasted 30 years. Mm-hmm. And I enjoyed just about every day of my life when I was traveling around various parts of the Midwest and talking with customers about problems they were having in measuring a process or mechanical. Mm-hmm. And so it was pretty much solving customer problems that I was involved in. And I could use my chemical background as well as an electronic background. I would return to school and had gone to night school while I was employed at Bendix Aerospace, and got to a point where Kay was teaching and I had just a term to go, and so we decided, let's finish this off. I go full-time to school, finish off those credits, and then I could face the world with some assurance that I had a good background to support this young lady and the family that were.
Right. Bob,
so,
with the, for the historians or wannabe historians amongst us, when you were talking about the space work and the warning systems in museum, I mean, for embassies and stuff around the world, when are you talking about? Is this in the 60s?
yes.
Or,
yeah.
Yeah.
Because Kay and I were married in '62, and that's the correct time frame.
Yeah.
For everything like that. Yeah.
Wow.
So
what a kind of a cutting edge time to be in both of those.
Well, it was,
arenas.
and marvelous transitions in electronics, because you start out with very heavy, well, the first version of solid state electronics were very heavy. They must have used plate iron and things like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, you have a computerized range computer, and you had in an aerospace vehicle, you would have a range computer, a lateral computer, and another roll computer. Well, each one of those would weigh in excess of 60 pounds. Yeah. So the energy to boost that up into space, it's easy to see why they went to interstages and things of that nature. But that eventually started adopting substrates and things like that. And so that weight problem was pretty much solved. And it's still a consideration.
Isn't it fascinating that now, something this size would have
now as a computer. It's a computer.
The same power. I mean, it's just astonishing.
We didn't see it. Or actually better at these cell phones and things like that you carry. Yeah. Tremendous progress.
Wow. Incredible.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was a great
Well, I think
travel through your school and work.
I'm
but
ready.
If you had,
excuse me,
sorry,
go ahead. No, I was just going to say, I'm ready for another 3 hours.
Can we order lunch?
Good idea.
If you had any spare time, hobbies or interests other than your career, what did you do for that?
Well, I love to read a lot. And unfortunately, I never learned the real way to do speed reading. I've taken courses in it, and they tell me that I'm supposed to be able to read a sentence that long and be able to go right down the page. Well, my way of speed reading is that sentence, that lead paragraph, that sentence, when I want to do that. But I'm so afraid of missing some of the jewels in literature. When you do that it's only very light reading books that I'll try and scan. Heavier ones, recently I went back to Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. I did a high school treatise on Dostoevsky. And I must have confessed that I didn't read all the book at that time. So I'm now struggling. I understand why. I did. But I enjoy a lot of the modern books. And that,
Wonderful, yeah.
so,
It's a great pastime.
yeah. I also enjoy music a great deal. And I just believe a home without music is not really a home.
Yeah.
And so I've had my, Will Kay has put up with my audio systems and built speakers, you know, that are awkward pieces of furniture in any room, you know.
And what kind of music do you like?
Well, mostly classical,
Yeah.
symphonic, yeah, so. And so it was kind of a thrill just the other evening when we went to Tanger Center that had just opened, and they played some Beethoven and Tchaikovsky piano concerto. And that opening has been going to happen for the last 2 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was a thrilling evening, it really was, yeah, so.
I might tell people, in case there's anyone here who doesn't know the Tanger Center, which I'd find hard to believe, but anyhow, in case you don't know it, it's the brand-new Performing Arts Center in Greensboro. And from everything I've heard, it's been worth the wait.
It is, it's huge, it's huge,
Though I'm
very
sure
comfortable.
the people running Tanger have gone nuts in the last year, wondering when it will
Yeah.
get off the road, or get off on the road. Are there things that in this short time, we've talked a fair bit about the picture of Bob Law and family, and we should acknowledge that Kay is in the audience here, so Kay, welcome. That people mightn't know about you, but might be interested in knowing about you.
Well, you mentioned, but not everybody knows because we have some new people in. But one of the good experience and worthwhile experience I've had is chairing a couple of the charitable activities that we have here. The Employee Appreciation Fund and the Annual Appeal for Presbyterian Homes. I've chaired both of those. And that was a good experience from the standpoint that I'd never done any fundraising in that capacity before. And it was enjoyable when we were able to mix a little bit more at dinner and things like that, just to mention these. And I found how easy it was to talk finances to not total strangers, but people I didn't know very well. And that was a good experience, very worthwhile, yeah. The other thing that you mentioned, and very few people know, that prior to moving to River Landing, Kay and I lived as a retirement center down in Sanford, North Carolina, at Carolina Trace. And during that time, I became a Stephen minister, which is a one-on-one ministry for persons that have endured a loss, either through illness or financial or anything like that. And so that has been a very worthwhile endeavor.
And are you continuing that now?
Well, not officially, but certainly able to become a good listener.
Yeah.
Which is really for the foundation of any kind of ministry. But we are separated from visiting those except by the phone, and that's difficult to establish a really close, intimate conversation with people just on the phone. Yeah. So, but anyway, I try my best. So.
Do you have a favorite river landing experience or two? Things that have happened to you that you didn't expect, that you would like to share?
Well, I think, yes. I think in moving here was a delightful experience, and one that was changed by some residents that were already here from Carolina Trace. Our first visit here was with a minister who had visited a lot of the retirement centers in this area around North Carolina. And we initially became interested in a place over in Durham called Crowsdale Retirement Home. And we had even decided that we would go there. And this other couple that lived here said, you know, we don't think that you've really seen all of River Landing. Why don't you come and stay with us? And we'll show you around the neighborhood and that. And they did. Many people remember, well, most people remember their name just slipped out of my head right now. But anyway, Ken Barber, that was his name. And Nancy, he was married to Nancy Barber. Anyway, they took us in for an evening and showed us around the town as much as they could of High Point and Greensboro and just a little bit of Winston-Salem. And suddenly I saw a different perspective of three pretty tight communities. And so the delight has been in getting to know them afresh. Now, I don't know any of them real well yet, but it sure is a joy to find these hidden treasures, particularly in music. We have the Greensboro Symphony, and we talked about it last night, or Saturday night. What a magnificent music mecca this area is. And so that was a great surprise and a wonderful understanding that that existed here. And Winston-Salem has little places tucked away. High Point has its redeeming features, and Greensboro remains a mystery, but there's certainly lots to offer in Greensboro.
Great.
So,
Bob, one of our stock questions that you know about because you got to see it in advance is if there are three people or four or two, whatever, in all of time that you could have a visit with over a meal or whatever, who might they be and why do they come up for you?
maybe I'm not quite so sure I want to tell you. No, I forget the joke. I do have some people that I wish it were possible to have conversation with.
Yeah.
One of them is Winston Churchill. Read a lot about Winston Churchill. Certainly a man that ended up pretty well beloved by his nation, but not totally. But a man of iron willpower and really the guiding light through the most crucial of time, World War II. And if it were not for Winston, there would be no United Kingdom today. It would be a German committee. I enjoy reading about Winston because he was certainly a worthwhile character. Very intelligent, had a gift of speaking, and very good being witty, sometimes not so funny, but very acerbic and could say things to the point. And I know you're laughing there, Jim. I'm sure you've heard the one where he liked to talk a great deal and kind of sermonize at dinners, group dinners, and he also enjoyed his liquor, his cocktails. And one evening he said some things that the woman sitting next to him felt were out of line. And she said, "Winston, you're drunk." And he looked at her and said, "Madam, you're quite right. But tomorrow I'll be sober. But you, my dear, will still be ugly." What an awful thing to say. But I mean, he was direct and to the point.
Yes.
But he took it as well as give it out, because he certainly was had a target on him.
The reason I'm laughing so much where I thought you were going with that was, I'm sure you know this one too, the famous exchange with Lady Astor. And she said, "Winston, if you were my husband, I'd poison your coffee." And he said, "Madam, if I were your husband, I'd drink it." Fits right into to what you're
Very
saying.
good, yeah. So, but that would be, I'm sure I would be intimidated in trying to chat and talk with Winston Churchill. The other is Ronald Reagan. And I have a lot of respect for Ronald Reagan. With all the bitterness, name-calling, I never heard him raise his voice. It was always a quiet response, but a very poignant one. And after you read about him, and particularly read his letters to other people, the man was really quite brilliant and very sensitive to other people's feelings. He could write about a 4-sentence letter to somebody that would bring, excuse me, that would bring tears to you just reading it, and you weren't involved in it. I mean, he could just phrase things so well. And his big rejoinder, I remember politically, was always, "There you go again." I mean, you just knew what he was going to say, but it brought the audience down and really just neutralized a whole moment of great tension in that. And those are my two favorites. The third is a grandfather that I met when I was probably 2 or 3 years old. Don't remember much about him. But he lived to be 92 years old, rode a bike gathering wood for the fireplace. They didn't have central heating in Scotland those days. And I would like to have known him from what I've heard about him.
Interesting.
So,
I'm curious, just to
Sure.
stay on Scotland for a second.
yeah, absolutely.
Whereabouts in Scotland?
From Ayr, which is the west side
Yeah.
of Scotland, in around the Glasgow region. My father was from a place called Strathaven, actually. And mother was from a place called Kilmarnock.
I remember when I was a kid, Kilmarnock had a great soccer team.
Yeah.
A great soccer team.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, they did, they did.
Bob, what has been your biggest surprise at River Landing since coming?
At River Landing, well, I think that's easy. Once living here and going back over all the other places that we had visited, I was surprised how I could have possibly thought of moving elsewhere before moving to River Landing. We have more to offer than any of the other places. And it's just, we both feel very fortunate. The surprise is the diversity of people that have moved here, wide backgrounds, various talents, and it's just a wonderful place to be. And the surprise is that I really like to try and be an ambassador for River Landing in pulling other people here. So,
Neat. So as we start to wind down this
Sure.
Lovely chat,
it can't be already.
time flies when you're having fun.
Easy for you to say.
As you anticipated coming to have this conversation, are there points that you had thought about that you'd either like to say or you sort of expected, well, they'll probably ask about this or that we haven't talked about, or that you want to say now by way of...
Well, not other points, probably go deeper into
Yeah.
what we've covered, but I know you're limited for about time in that.
In the interest of full disclosure, we did alert Bob beforehand that no run-on sentences or paragraphs were allowed, but we'll waive that rule for the moment. So go ahead.
Well, I see our director over there. Yes, so, well, it's been a pleasure being here, Bill. It's been a pleasure being here. So thank you ever so much, Jim. And Helen.
Thank you. Been a wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you for joining us for another River Landing conversation. Bob, it's been a joy, as we fully expected. Excuse me. And we will look forward next week to having another conversation with another interesting resident of our great community. Helen, thank you, and good afternoon.